It is the winter of 1944. A 22-year-old American sergeant is pinned behind a stone wall in a French village. A German machine gun nest is 80 yards ahead. His men cannot move. 3 of them are already down. He reaches for the radio strapped to his back. 90 seconds later, an M4 Sherman tank around the corner is already moving toward the target. That machine gun nest was gone in 2 minutes. In the German army, that same process would have taken an hour. If the runners survived, everyone argues about tanks, everyone argues about planes. Nobody talks about the 35-pound box that made every single one of them more lethal. My name is Eddie Arsenal. Hit that subscribe button right now if this is your first time here. This channel is where the real stories get told. Here is the paradox. The German Wehrmacht was one of the most technologically sophisticated armies ever assembled. And yet at the tactical level, the sergeant, the platoon leader, the company commander, they were fighting like it was 1918. The Americans were not. Today we are talking about the SCR-300, a backpack radio developed by Motorola in 1940. Never on a propaganda poster, never in a Hollywood movie, and yet it made the American way of war actually work. This story is bigger than one radio. It is about what happens when you give a sergeant the ability to talk directly to a tank, an artillery battery, and an aircraft simultaneously. In real time, while under fire. Before the SCR-300 existed, battlefield communication at the infantry level was essentially the same system Napoleon used. Messages traveled at the speed of a running man. Wire gets cut by artillery, runners get shot, flares get missed in smoke. Every army in World War II knew this problem existed. Only one solved it at the tactical level. And the solution came from a radio company in Chicago. Motorola did not think it was impossible. In 1940, the U.S. Army Signal Corps issued a requirement: a portable radio small enough for one man to carry, rugged enough to survive combat, and capable of clear voice communication across ranges useful to infantry units. The engineering challenge was immense. Every component that made a radio powerful also made it heavy, fragile, or power-hungry, and Motorola's engineers had to compress technology that previously filled a room into a package one soldier could carry through mud, rain, and artillery barrages. What they produced was the SCR-300. It weighed 35 pounds with its battery, operated in the FM frequency band, and had a range of approximately 3 miles in open terrain. That FM frequency choice was not accidental. AM radio, what most military radios of the era used, was constantly overwhelmed by interference from tank engines, electrical equipment, and artillery fire. FM was dramatically cleaner. In a battlefield full of noise, that difference was the difference between communication and static. The SCR-300 was also genuinely rugged. It was tested in conditions that destroyed most electronics of its era: river crossings, tropical heat, Arctic cold, direct exposure to rain and mud. Motorola built it to survive the same environment the soldier carrying it had to survive. The battery was the one genuine limitation. The SCR-300 ran for approximately 2 to 3 hours of continuous operation before requiring a replacement battery, and in sustained combat, battery resupply became a genuine logistics priority. Entire supply chains were organized around keeping SCR-300 batteries moving forward to the units that needed them. The first combat use came in Sicily in 1943. American infantry units equipped with the -300 Seychelles rupees immediately began responding to tactical situations faster than their size should have allowed, and German commanders reading the after-action reports could not explain it. A German company commander looking at a map could not understand how an American platoon of 40 men was consistently calling in artillery and armor support within minutes of contact. The answer was sitting on the back of every American radio operator in that platoon. Now let's talk about what the SCR-300 actually made possible, because the technical specifications are interesting, but the tactical revolution they enabled is where this story becomes genuinely remarkable. The concept is called combined arms, and the SCR-300 is what turned it from a theory into a daily reality that German commanders faced across every front. Combined arms is not a complicated idea. Infantry, armor, artillery, and air power working together, each one compensating for the weaknesses of the others. each one multiplying the effectiveness of the others. The problem was never the concept. The problem was always connecting them fast enough to matter. The German army understood combined arms theory. Their doctrine was in many ways more sophisticated than American doctrine at the conceptual level. But initiative and judgment require information, and information requires communication. Without reliable tactical radio, their doctrine had no nervous system to execute it. The practical consequence showed up in battle after battle across North Africa, Sicily, Italy, and France. German units that were stronger on paper, better tanks, more experienced crews, better defensive positions, were defeated by American units that could coordinate their available weapons faster than the Germans could respond. One of the clearest illustrations came during the breakout from Normandy in the summer of 1944, Operation Cobra. American infantry had been grinding through hedgerow country for weeks, taking casualties against German defenders who used the terrain with brutal skill. Every hedgerow was a fortress. Every sunken lane was an ambush. The solution was the tank infantry team, Sherman tanks working directly alongside infantry squads, each tank in direct radio communication with the sergeant it was supporting. When a machine gun opened up from a hedgerow, the sergeant called the tank. The tank moved exactly where directed. The position was destroyed. The infantry advanced. This sounds simple. It was not. Making it work required that the infantry sergeant and the tank commander could talk directly to each other. Not through a chain of command, not through hand signals, not through a runner. Directly, in real time, while both were under fire. The SCR-300 made that conversation possible. The artillery coordination the SCR-300 enabled was equally revolutionary. American artillery in World War II was already the most sophisticated in the world in terms of fire direction methods and the ability to mass fires from multiple batteries simultaneously. What it needed was accurate, real-time targeting from men who could actually see the enemy. Forward observers, artillery spotters positioned with the infantry, used the -300 Seychelles rupees to call fire missions directly to artillery batteries. A forward observer could identify a target, transmit the grid coordinates, and have rounds impacting within minutes. The German soldier on the receiving end experienced something terrifying: accurate, rapidly adjusted artillery fire that seemed to follow him wherever he moved. The German army's response to accurate artillery fire was to move, relocate quickly before the next adjustment could come in. Against conventional artillery coordination, this worked. Against an American forward observer with an SCR-300, it did not. The adjustment came faster than the move. The rounds followed. There was nowhere to go. Now let's talk about air support, because the SCR-300's role in connecting ground forces to aircraft overhead is one of the most underappreciated dimensions of American tactical air power in World War II. The P-47 Thunderbolt is remembered as a devastating ground attack aircraft. What is less remembered is that its effectiveness depended almost entirely on the man on the ground with a radio. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a remarkable aircraft. 8.50 caliber machine guns, rockets, bombs, and the ruggedness to absorb significant damage and keep flying. But a P-47 pilot at 5,000 feet cannot reliably distinguish a German tank from an American one, cannot identify which building contains a machine gun nest, cannot see the hidden artillery position in the tree line. The solution was the forward air controller, a specially trained officer positioned with the forward infantry equipped with an SCR-300 and in direct radio contact with the aircraft overhead. The forward air controller could see what the pilot could not. The pilot could deliver firepower the infantry could not. The radio connected them. The results were devastating for German ground forces. A German column moving down a road in France in 1944 could find itself under attack from P-47s within minutes of being spotted by American infantry. The forward air controller called the aircraft, described the target, talked the pilot onto it, and watched the strike go in, all in real time, all through the -300 Seychelles rupees. German commanders began reporting a phenomenon they called Jabos, their slang for fighter bombers that seemed to appear with uncanny accuracy over any German movement during daylight hours. They attributed it to sophisticated American radar or observation aircraft. The actual explanation was simpler and more devastating. American infantry with radios were watching every road, every tree line, every river crossing. This created a strategic consequence that went far beyond the tactical level. German forces in France in 1944 effectively lost the ability to move during daylight. Any column, any convoy, any concentration of vehicles that moved in daylight was almost certain to be spotted, reported, and struck within minutes. The SCR-300 network turned the entire French countryside into a killing ground for anything that moved in the open. German logistics, the fuel, ammunition, and reinforcements that any army needs to fight, were devastated by this system. Supply columns that had to move at night, over damaged roads, without lights, covering distances that should have taken hours in twice the time, while American forces resupplied freely during the day. The communications gap was not just winning individual firefights, it was strangling the German army's ability to sustain the campaign. Now, let's talk about a specific battle that illustrates everything we have discussed, because the numbers and the doctrine become real when you put them against a specific day, a specific place, and specific men. The battle is the Falaise Pocket in August 1944, and it is one of the most complete destructions of a major military force in the entire history of the war. By August 1944, the German army in Normandy was in serious trouble. The breakout from the hedgerows had succeeded. American armor was sweeping around the German flanks. The possibility of encircling an entire German army group, trapping it in a pocket with no escape, was becoming real. American and Canadian forces raced to close the gap near the town of Falaise. Inside the Falaise Pocket, approximately 100,000 German soldiers attempted to escape through a corridor that was closing by the hour. The roads inside the pocket were choked with vehicles, horse-drawn artillery, supply wagons, and men on foot, all trying to move through a narrowing gap while Allied forces pressed from every direction. What happened next was a systematic destruction enabled directly by American communications capability. Forward observers with SCR-300s positioned on the high ground surrounding the pocket called in artillery missions continuously, adjusting fire in real time as targets moved, shifting fires from one column to another, coordinating between multiple batteries simultaneously. Forward air controllers with SCR-300s guided wave after wave of P-47s and RAF Typhoons onto the columns below. The aircraft struck, returned to base to rearm, and came back to find new targets waiting, called in by the same forward air controllers who had watched the first strike go in and were already identifying the next one. The road through the Falaise Pocket became one of the most horrific scenes of the entire Western Front. Thousands of vehicles destroyed, thousands of horses killed, thousands of men dead on the roads they had tried to escape on. Allied commanders who walked through afterward described it as unlike anything they had ever seen, destruction on a scale that seemed impossible in the time it had been accomplished. That destruction was accomplished in days. The German forces that escaped the pocket were shadows of military units, men without vehicles, without artillery, without equipment, without the organizational structure to fight effectively. The German army in France never recovered from the Falaise Pocket. The road to Germany was open. And the SCR-300, the unglamorous backpack radio that nobody puts on a poster, was the instrument that coordinated every artillery battery, every airstrike, every infantry advance that turned the Falaise Pocket into the disaster it became for Germany. Without it, the pocket closes more slowly, more German forces escape, the war lasts longer. Now let's talk about the Pacific Theater, because the SCR-300 story is not only a European story. The Pacific presented different challenges: jungle terrain, island assaults, extreme heat and humidity, and the SCR-300 adapted to all of them. Island assaults in the Pacific created a specific communications nightmare that the SCR-300 was uniquely positioned to solve. Landing craft approaching a beach had no reliable way to communicate with the men already ashore, with the naval gunfire support ships offshore, or with the aircraft providing air cover overhead. Coordinating all three simultaneously required a radio that could go onto the beach with the first wave. At Iwo Jima in February 1945, Marine forward observers carrying SCR-300S landed with the assault waves and immediately began calling naval gunfire onto Japanese defensive positions. The ships offshore could not see the specific positions that were killing Marines on the beach, but the forward observers could. The radio connected the man on the beach to the 16-inch guns of the battleships offshore. The Japanese defensive doctrine at Iwo Jima was built around concealment. Positions dug deep into volcanic rock, hidden from aerial observation, invisible to naval gunfire, that was not precisely directed. The SCR-300 stripped away that concealment advantage. What the Japanese could hide from aircraft and ships, they could not hide from a Marine lying 20 yards away with a radio. The jungle fighting in the Philippines and on the other Pacific islands presented a different challenge. Terrain so dense that units separated by 50 yards could lose all visual contact with each other. In jungle combat, maintaining unit cohesion and preventing friendly fire required constant communication between elements that could not see each other. The SCR-300 provided that communication where nothing else could. Japanese forces in the Pacific, like German forces in Europe, recognized that American communications capability was doing something to the battlefield that their own doctrine could not match. Japanese after-action reports from multiple Pacific campaigns noted with alarm the speed at which American units called supporting fires and the accuracy with which those fires arrived. They correctly identified American radio communications as a key advantage, but had no answer for it. Now let's pause and give this the weight it deserves. Because behind every radio call we have discussed, there was a man making it. A forward observer, lying in the open, exposed, calling fire missions while artillery rounds fell around him. A tank infantry team sergeant directing armor from a position that made him a priority target for every German gun that could reach him. The radio operators who carried the SCR-300 were specific targets. German snipers were trained to identify and prioritize radio operators. The man with the antenna on his back was the man who made the American unit more dangerous than it should have been, and eliminating him was worth the risk of exposing the sniper's position. American radio operators knew this. They carried the radio anyway. There's a specific weight to that knowledge, going into combat knowing that the equipment you are carrying makes you the priority target. That the antenna on your back is visible from distances a rifle can reach. That the enemy has been specifically trained to shoot you first, and carrying it anyway, because the men around you need what that radio can do. That courage, quiet, specific, informed courage, is not the courage of the charge or the last stand. It is the courage of the man who understands exactly what the risk is, makes the calculation, and picks up the radio. It deserves to be named with the same weight as any other form of courage in this war. Now let's talk about the German communications system, because to fully understand the American advantage, you need to understand specifically what the Germans had and why it was not enough. Because the German army was not ignorant of radio technology. They had radios. They used them. The gap was more specific and more devastating than a simple technology comparison suggests. The German army used radio extensively at the battalion level and above. Regimental, divisional, and corps headquarters communicated by radio with reasonable effectiveness. At those levels, German communications were adequate and sometimes excellent. The catastrophic gap was at the company and platoon level, exactly where the tactical decisions that determine individual battles are made. German infantry platoons and companies at the tactical level communicated primarily by telephone wire, runners, and visual signals, exactly the methods that failed under the same conditions every time. The German military radio of equivalent size to the SCR-300, the Tornfu, was heavier, shorter ranged, less reliable, and produced in far smaller numbers than American communications equipment. The production numbers tell a stark story. By 1944, American factories were producing communications equipment, radios, telephone systems, signal wire, at a volume that the German war economy simply could not approach. America produced more signal equipment in a single month of 1944 than Germany produced in entire quarters. Communications equipment was not glamorous. American industrial planners treated it as essential anyway. There's a deeper reason the German communications gap was never closed, and it connects to the fundamental difference in how the two armies thought about the soldier at the bottom of the hierarchy. American doctrine assumed the sergeant needed information and the ability to act on it. German doctrine assumed the sergeant needed orders and the discipline to execute them. One of those assumptions required radio at the tactical level. The other did not. This philosophical difference, American trust in the initiative of the junior leader versus German emphasis on disciplined execution of orders from above, shaped equipment priorities in ways that determined battles years later. American planners bought radios for sergeants because they believed sergeants needed them. German planners did not, because their doctrine did not ask sergeants to do what American doctrine expected of them. Now let's talk about the broader American communication system, because the SCR-300 was the most famous component, but it was part of a complete communications architecture that stretched from the individual soldier all the way to theater command. Understanding the complete system explains why American coordination was so consistently faster than German coordination at every level of the battle. The SCR-300 operated at the platoon and company level, the tactical edge of the battlefield. Above it, the -536 Seychelles rupees, the handy-talkie, smaller and shorter ranged, was used for communication within platoons, between squad leaders and their platoon commander. Below the SCR-300, the -536 Seychelles rupees extended communications down to the squad level, giving American units a communications density that no other army in the war approached. Above the SCR-300 at battalion and regimental level, larger vehicle-mounted radios connected the tactical units to the operational headquarters. Above those, the strategic communication systems connected theater headquarters across continents and oceans. Every level of the American military command was connected to every other level by a radio network that functioned continuously, reliably, and at a speed that German commanders found consistently incomprehensible. The result was what military theorists call information superiority. Not just having better weapons, but knowing more about the battlefield than the enemy, faster than the enemy, and being able to act on that knowledge before the enemy could respond. Information superiority does not appear on a weapon list. It does not photograph well. It does not make a good museum exhibit. And it was arguably the single most decisive American advantage of the entire war. Now let's bring this story to its conclusion, because the complete arc of the SCR-300's history reveals something important about how wars are actually decided. Not always by the weapon that looks most impressive, not always by the technology that gets the most attention, sometimes by the capability that makes everything else work. The Sherman tank was outgunned by the Tiger. Every military historian acknowledges this, and yet American armored forces defeated German armored forces consistently across multiple campaigns. The explanation is not found in the armor or the gun. It is found in the ability of American tank commanders to communicate with each other, with infantry, with artillery, and with air support faster than German tank commanders could respond to any of it. The P-47 Thunderbolt was a remarkable aircraft. But P-47s without forward air controllers with radios were aircraft looking for targets they could not reliably identify. P-47s with forward air controllers with -300 Seychelles rupees S were a precision weapon that could be directed onto any target that an American infantryman could see, which, by 1944, meant any target on the Western Front. American artillery was the best in the world, but the best artillery in the world without real-time targeting from forward observers is artillery firing at map coordinates and hoping. American artillery with SCR-300 equipped forward observers was artillery that could find a target, range it, adjust fire in real time, and shift to the next target, all faster than the German unit being shelled could relocate. This is the multiplier effect, and it is the reason the SCR-300 deserves to be discussed in the same conversation as any tank, any aircraft, any artillery piece of World War II. It did not replace those weapons, it multiplied them. Every American weapon became more effective because of the communications network that connected it to every other American weapon. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The war in the Pacific ended on September 2, 1945. The factors that produce those endings are complex and numerous. Industrial production, strategic bombing, naval power, the courage and sacrifice of millions of men and women. But running through all of it, invisible and essential, was the communications network that made the American military function as a coordinated whole rather than a collection of separate parts. And at the tactical edge of that network, in the hedgerows of Normandy, on the beaches of Iwo Jima, in the jungles of the Philippines, in the mountains of Italy, was a sergeant with a 35-pound radio on his back, calling the shot that made the difference. Not a hero in the traditional sense, not a pilot or a tank commander or a ship captain, a man with a radio, doing the most important thing any soldier can do in a modern battle, talking. Now, I want to give the SCR-300 its complete final assessment, because this piece of equipment deserves a verdict that accounts for the full weight of its contribution. It was not the most powerful weapon in the American arsenal. It fired nothing. It destroyed nothing directly. On a list of weapons, it should not even appear. It was a radio, not a gun. And yet, without it, the Sherman tank was less effective. Without it, the P-47 was less accurate. Without it, American artillery was less precise. Without it, the combined arms doctrine that made the American military the most lethal fighting force in the world was a theory without a nervous system. The German army had better tanks, they had brilliant engineers and courageous soldiers, and sophisticated doctrine, and they lost, consistently, comprehensively, irreversibly, to an American military that could communicate faster at every level from the sergeant to the theater commander. That communications advantage did not happen accidentally. It happened because American planners made a decision that the sergeant on the ground needed a radio, that junior leaders needed information, that the man closest to the enemy was the most important person in the battle and needed to be connected to every weapon that could support him. That decision, made years before the first shot was fired in France, won battles that no tank and no aircraft could have won alone. It is the kind of decision that military history almost never celebrates, because it happened in a procurement office and a Signal Corps laboratory rather than on a battlefield. But its consequences were felt on every battlefield, in every hedgerow, on every beach, in every jungle. Every time an American sergeant reached for a radio and called in the support that saved his men, that was the decision paying off. That was the SCR-300 earning its place in history. The SCR-300, it looked like a box. It weighed 35 pounds. It was never on a poster and never in a movie. And it was arguably the most important American weapon of the entire Second World War. Drop a comment telling me, did you know the SCR-300 existed before today? And if you want to know about the American invention so classified that Allied commanders refused to use it over enemy territory for fear of capture, the weapon that doubled the kill rate of every anti-aircraft gun in the Allied arsenal and was hidden in plain sight for years, that story is next. Subscribe to Eddie Arsenal, hit the bell, and I will see you in the next one. Let's load it up.